All right, there is so much chatter about the SEC or the Big Ten. And I have told you guys on this channel, on College Football Addiction, I have told you guys that I feel like the Big Ten is where we're going to land. And that has been my thought for a long time. But some opinions are starting to change. You're starting to see more of this SEC type landing spot narrative, whatever you want to call it, back in play. And I think there are reasons for that, reasons that we may talk about in our Discord a little bit, reasons that we may talk about like off camera, off record some. But all of that aside, and if you want to go sign up for the Patreon and maybe get access to that, be my guest. It's in the description. But all of that aside, I think what really is the big question, and that FSU fans have been arguing about, is what is better for FSU? What is the better fit? What's better financially? What's better just for the Seminoles in general? And I understand this. There is a large portion of you that are still very upset about the way that things ended last year. You're still very upset about the way that things went down with ESPN. You're very upset about the way things went down with the SEC and with Bama and Texas getting in over us. And I get that. I will never let that go. We could win the next 3 titles, and I'd be frustrated by saying, well, it should have been a chance at 4. That said, I don't think the people in power are making decisions based on what happened at the end of the 2023 season. I don't think the people in power and the people making decisions really care all that much, just to be honest with you. I think they still feel jilted by that. I think they're still frustrated by that. I think they're still upset at the way things went down, but I don't think that's driving their decision making. I think there are a lot bigger reasons why certain conferences, certain landing spots make sense for the Seminoles. And I think the SEC makes far more sense. Like, I'm not going to bury this late and then have this big reveal at the end. I'll just tell you, I think the SEC makes more sense. We're going to talk about that culturally. A lot of you have questions about that financially, monetarily. Why? Oh, man, don't you make more money in the Big Ten? Maybe pump the brakes on that just a little bit. And we'll talk about all of that in just a moment. Culturally, there is no question that the SEC is a better fit for the Seminoles. There is no question that the way that the program feels, the way that there's an investment in all sports, the way that Florida State wants to be the best in everything, the reason they finished, top 12 in the Learfield Directors' Cup rankings is because they care about everything. And that's just not the case in the Big Ten, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. You also think about like this, just the simple fan bases. The way that Florida State fans act is much more, and I know you guys hate them, but it's much closer to an SEC crowd, a crowd that cares about stuff than just your average Big Ten school. Now, are Ohio State fans rabid? Are Penn State fans rabid? Are Michigan fans rabid? Yes, to all of that. Are Rutgers fans? Are Illinois fans? Are fans of Minnesota? I think there are more fits from a fan base perspective. And then I talked about investment in athletics. I think an investment in athletics is very important, and I don't think all the Big Ten teams have that. I don't think all of the Big Ten programs have that. And so some of your frustration with the ACC and some of your frustration with, man, why are BC and Syracuse and Wake and some of these other programs, like, they're just not putting back into it. Why does this program have such terrible facility? That exists in the Big Ten too. And it's more of an investment that they make into academics, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It still is an academic university. That's completely okay. But some of your frustrations with the ACC would carry over to the Big Ten as well, just because of the investment level. What about geographically? It makes way more sense for Florida State to stay in the Southeast and compete against teams in the Southeast. Traveling, people say, oh, well, you're already traveling to Syracuse and Boston College. Syracuse is less than 1,000-mile flight, whereas Oregon's over 2,300 miles. It truly just is not the same. And then obviously you've got Washington up there. You've obviously got the Southern Cal teams up there, which are all more than that 900-mile flight that you're going to Syracuse. Travel for opponents. Getting opponents in and capitalizing on that is huge too. And so geographically, it makes more sense. And we'll talk about the Olympic sports. We'll talk about what travel would mean for not only the team, but also for the fan base. I think if you're wanting the Big Ten, and there's nothing wrong with that, you can certainly have your preference. But if you're wanting the Big Ten, I wonder, are you going to games? And there's nothing wrong if you're not. But as somebody who does travel regularly for work and pleasure, going to Big Ten games sounds awful. Going to games in Champaign, Illinois, or going to games in Minnesota, or going to games in, honestly, I'd love to go to the Big House, but going to games in Michigan sounds terrible. Going to games in New Jersey sounds awful. That's what we're doing now, going to Syracuse and BC. But going to games in the Southeast, there are not many bad venues, bad locations to get to. I wouldn't be super juiced about Missouri. I wouldn't be super juiced about the game against Vanderbilt, but going to Nashville doesn't sound awful. Mississippi State, maybe not the craziest opponent, but they get down there. Starkville's fun. So I think geographically it makes a lot more sense. All right, what about the revenue gap? What about the money? Isn't the Big Ten worth so much more? I don't necessarily think that that's a big concern. Before I talk about that, I will tell you something that I am concerned about. Don't laugh at this, but it is the concern around running out of mangoes in my house when it's summertime. That happened to me this week, and my kids are home during the summer, and I can get away with that during the school year because they're so busy. But I got a stern talking to from my 5-year-old because we didn't have her favorite snack in the house. Now, I'm not a health nut. I'm not going to talk to you about all the benefits. We certainly splurge on ice cream here and there and have our share of favorite treats that we eat. But it is nice to know that when I grab a mango for the kids, I know they're not eating something that's loaded with a bunch of junk out of the cookie or chip or cereal aisle. So next time you're at your local grocer, you don't have to do anything special. Just grab a couple of mangoes. Make sure that you're following the mango board on social media, which I'll link in the description, and enjoy. That's all you got to do. Enjoy the best fruit that exists. Enjoy the best fruit out there. And say thanks to the mango board for supporting not only our show, but FSU athletics. What about that revenue gap? What about the money? Isn't the money so much more in the Big Ten? Isn't that something that we just need the most that we can possibly get? The money between the Big Ten and the SEC, the payouts or what they're projected at down to like 2036 is about a $10 million gap. It is more in the Big Ten. There's no doubt. Right now, it's significantly less. I will say this, though. A lot of those projections that you have seen are just that. They are projections. And what does the revenue look like in the SEC if a Florida State and Clemson are to join? What does it end up looking like from that perspective? It shrinks, for sure. The SEC deal is more valuable with Florida State and Clemson in it. It's a bigger pie that you're going to get. Now, what about the external factors? Let's just give the Big Ten the benefit of the doubt. And let's call that gap $5 million. A $5 million gap in revenue that you could be making in the Big Ten. I think you far exceed that if you're Florida State based on ticket sales. I think you far exceed that if you're Florida State based on your booster memberships increasing. I think if you go to your boosters and say, hey, we are going to the SEC, I think your booster numbers increase not only in number of donors, but amount of donors. I think the idea is, hey, this is what we're doing for you, fan base. What are you doing for us? And I think people will increase. I think money will go up. You will no longer have games that are not sold out. You will no longer have every week will be sold out. Again, maybe your Vandies aren't sold out, your FCS game not sold out, but every week there is not that just crap ACC opponent coming in. You're selling out more big games. It's better for the local economy. And I think Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, there would be games that sell out here in Tallahassee too. But you bring in Illinois, you bring in Rutgers, you bring in Minnesota, Wisconsin even. I don't know that those games are selling out. I don't know that that's a continuous sellout type thing. And so I think ticket sales, booster increases are going to help you make up that gap and then far exceed it. I think going to the SEC is better for all sports, and I think you're going to see ticket prices and sales go up due to all sports. Now, there are some of you who are scared to death of an SEC schedule, and I'm not really sure why. There's the idea of, well, what if one year we got Florida's schedule? Well, what if one year we did get Florida's schedule? That would be difficult. There's no doubt about it. But you can't look at Florida's schedule right now and tell me that you just would be deathly afraid of it. Play Miami week 1 in Doak, right? If you went game for game, play Miami week 1 in Doak. It's Cam's first game, a bad Miami team that's going to need some time to gel. Miami's barely a favorite over 5-win Florida, like 2 points. You don't think we'd be a favorite week 1 in Doak? I'd take Florida State in that game. Samford, easy win. Texas A&M, brand new coach. It would be their first SEC game coming to Tallahassee with a brand new coach, brand new roster. I'd take Florida State in that game. On the road at Mississippi State, I'd take Florida State in that game, brand new coach. Kentucky, I'd take Florida State in that game. Wouldn't think twice. I think Florida State would be a road favorite. Tennessee might be a tough one. Maybe call that a toss-up. Tennessee certainly packs it out. They do a great job. I don't know that Tennessee is as good of a program as Florida State is right now, or really has ever been. Maybe that's a tough one. You want to call that a coin flip? I'm okay with it. UGA, I think that's a loss. We can be pretty honest about that. Ole Miss, another tough one. That would be in Doak. So I'd probably lean Florida State. But you could say Tennessee and Ole Miss are a couple of toss-ups. LSU, that's a win, especially in Doak Campbell Stadium. We'd prove that for the 3rd year in a row. Texas, that'd be another tough one. I'd honestly call that another coin flip. I'd say that'd be a tough one to win. Not impossible. Probably the hardest on the schedule minus UGA. But I think that'd be a tough game, no doubt. And then FSU there at the end, so you'd call that the Florida game. I think you beat Florida either way, right? So, yeah, so you'd say, well, the Georgia game's a loss, and then you got 3 toss-ups. You go 2-1 in those toss-ups, you're 10-2. You go 1-2 in those toss-ups, and you're 9-3. You say you lose all 3 of them. 8-4. That's certainly not the standard. That's not what you want. But 8-4 against that schedule, certainly not undoable. I left the UCF game out of there. You're beating UCF in there as well. But as much as we give Florida's schedule, oh my God, what if we ever got that? Well, what if you played a schedule like Missouri's playing this year? I mean, has anybody looked at Missouri's schedule? Murray State, that's a win. Buffalo, that's a win. Boston College, that's a win. Vandy, that's a win. Texas A&M, for the same reasons we talked about earlier, that's a win. UMass, that's a win. Auburn, that's a win. Bama, that's a tough one. Say you lose the Bama game. Oklahoma, I think you beat them, but that's a tough one. South Carolina, Mississippi State, Arkansas. I mean, you might lose 2 games. And if you just split with Bama and OU, you're in the playoff at 11-1. You might be in the SEC championship with that record. Oh, man, Florida State could never survive an SEC schedule. Man, I'll tell you, Florida's schedule would be tough. I don't know how much fear that Missouri schedule strikes into my heart. And so this idea that Florida State could never compete in the SEC, there are a lot more schedules like Missouri's than there are like Florida's, just for the record. Teams like Arkansas, Mississippi State, South Carolina, Auburn, Texas A&M, Kentucky, Florida right now. There are a lot, Vandy. There are a lot of SEC teams that aren't on Florida State's level or aren't even close to Florida State's level. Yeah, the Texases and the Oklahomas and the Georgias and the Bamas and the LSUs, there are teams that certainly could compete with Florida State and would do very well against Florida State. But to act like all of them would just run through the Seminoles is pretty silly. What about Olympic sports? I'm sharing this later in the video. Again, I know that not all of you care about Olympic sports, and that's totally fine. That's your call. But I'll tell you, you want to see our Olympic sports die, I think you go to the Big Ten. Now, financially, they'd be fine. And they'd probably dominate most of the Olympic sports in the Big Ten. They would be very, very good. But the SEC is the clear leader in several of them. Clear leader in softball now that they've gotten Texas and Oklahoma. They've also got, obviously, LSU, Alabama, Florida in there as well. You're talking 5 of the top 10 programs in the country. Florida State's in that top 10. UCLA's in that top 10. But a lot of the class of the country is in the SEC. They're obviously the best in baseball. We learned that this year. The Big Ten, awful in baseball. Florida State would go there and dominate. They should win that league 7 out of every 10 years, if not more. But then you're not going to get the respect. The same way that it happened to you in the playoffs committee this year in football, the same way that it happened to Duke softball with the playoff with the selection committee, how they didn't host a super regional. You're never going to get the respect there. Playing teams in the Big Ten's a pain. It will kill Olympic sports. SEC is becoming the best conference in basketball. The Big Ten is pretty respectable here. I don't think that they're terrible by any means, but I think you want to be in the SEC in hoops as well. You think about soccer. You think about some of the other ones. I think the Big Ten will have some good soccer programs. They do a good job with that, but not like the SEC. Where do we get Penske from? Well, Tennessee. The programs there are legit. Now, the ACC still probably runs soccer. Like that still is the soccer conference. But I do think that your Olympic sports take a huge hit. We talk about the travel. We talk about the cost. And I think your Olympic sports suffer from the Big Ten. I think a lot of the coaches at FSU understand that. The coaches at FSU aren't necessarily the ones making the decisions, but I think that they prefer that. What about golf? Look at who won the golf championship. Auburn, again, an SEC program. And I think that's where you ultimately want to go if you're focused on the entirety of the program. There are benefits to the Big Ten. I don't necessarily know that we're going to do a Big Ten video because that's not what I personally want. I personally, as someone who goes to games, as somebody who cares about the Olympic sports, as somebody who thinks that we would actually make more money in the SEC despite the media payouts, I prefer the SEC. I think when you think about geography, fit, money, I still think is SEC, even though the Big Ten media payout is slightly more. I think you make more money in the SEC, and as somebody who cares about going to the games and the Olympic sports, I think everything leans SEC in my mind. That said, I'm not a decision maker. I will not have the final say in this. I will not have any say in this. And I think if you want the Big Ten for whatever reason, you hate ESPN, you hate the SEC, you hate this, you hate that, whatever. You live in Big Ten country, whatever. There are real reasons to want the Big Ten. They just don't really resonate with me. So I lean SEC here. I think it's what's better for FSU. I know there's a lot of talk about a decision coming soon. I don't necessarily have any information on that. I don't think anybody really does. I think it's likely within the next month or so. But hopefully, when an announcement finally is made of a landing spot, hopefully it is the SEC. I think it makes more sense. I think it's better for FSU. I'm also okay with you disagreeing with me. And if you want to leave those comments down below, I'm more than happy to hear it. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Go Noles.